Hey there, scary story fanatics! Welcome back to Cleaving Thought from Bone with your host, Sociopathic. I hope you're all fit and trim. For tonight, we don our bathing suits because it's gonna be a bloodbath. So, grab your machete and get ready to head towards the lake. Tonight's juicy tidbit is a story that I like to call The Stoney Heart of the Black Woods.
Hamburgers wiggled and moved about the screen, between a set of pixelated top and bottom teeth, avoiding the incoming fire of Jacob's toothpaste attacks. The game was a vintage Atari 2600 game, but modern for his time. Jacob was closing in on a high score, as this was his third time around the sequence of varied stages. "Jacob, it's time to come feed the dogs." He heard his mother's voice carry from downstairs and down the hall to his bedroom. Jacob shot his head up quickly, being startled by his mother's request. As he did, a straggling hamburger landed on his last tooth, rotting it away and ending his chance at beating his high score. Jacob slammed the Atari paddle onto his bed and stomped his way downstairs. Sure, Jacob had an anger problem, especially in recent years, as this quality seemed to only be more prominent as Jacob moved into his adolescent years. But his mother expected it and had begun to give up. Chores had to get done. "Don't forget that when you're done, I need you to bring the gas tanks up the hill." Jacob never broke stride as his mother talked, walking right by her as she reminded him of the fuel for the tractor. Jacob did as his mother told him. It's not that he didn't love his family. Jacob didn't love his life. He was a single child. His father worked out of town nearly 5 days a week. He was regularly picked on, in and out of school. And his mother, although she loved him dearly, was tired of the stress associated with raising children. She would buy Jacob things, a TV, a classic game system, but this all really just to keep him out of her hair. Jacob went to the shed, adjacent to the old, large, country-style home, to fetch some dog food in an empty bucket. After filling the bucket with food, Jacob proceeded back into the mudroom of the home and filled a large pitcher full of warm water from the bathtub in the mudroom. Sure, he could have used the water from Locust Lake, only 50 to 60 feet away from the home, but the warm water helped to soften the kibble, something beneficial for the lab puppies currently living in the pen with their mother. After feeding the dogs and placing the bucket back where he had gotten it from, Jacob walked back to the shed to retrieve a couple of gas cans. Jacob squinted in the sun as he walked behind the home with the cans to an old beat-up Ford coupe. Although the loud vehicle did in fact run, it had major issues. It leaked nearly every type of fluid, and the wheels needed to be chalked with a log or large stone, as the brakes had not been functional in years. In order to get the vehicle back down the trail, Jacob would need to place the transmission in first gear so as to greatly limit the car's top speed. It would never be safe for travel on the road, and was used exclusively for bringing equipment up the mountain trail to the area of land that his father was developing by hand in his free time. Chuck Treagle, Jacob's father, was a mechanic, and a good one. But he had a childlike dream of building a hunting cabin in the woods on the same mountainside that their house resided upon. The trees in the area had already been cut down, segmented, and brought down the hillside to be used for firewood during the long winter to come. After placing the flammable fluids in the trunk of the vehicle next to various pieces of scrap metal and equipment replacement parts, such as spare chainsaw chains and plugs, a 16-year-old Jacob got behind the driver's seat, started the old guzzler, and drove slowly up the trail towards his destination. As he drove through the wooded, curvy trail, Jacob took in the splendor of an area of the forest he had come to call the Black Woods. He named it this because the canopy was so thick here, and the tree's bark was unusually a dark shade of brown and gray. It gave the location the look of twilight, even during the brightest of days. As grim as the area looked, Jacob never minded venturing here. There was a peacefulness in it, and he had never gotten an eerie feeling from the place. He had only derived its name simply from how it looked. It wasn't much farther, as the area being developed for the cabin was only a few 100 feet above the black-wooded area on the side of the mountain. As Jacob pulled up, and before he could even park the vehicle, he spied 3 asshole bullies who lived on the same desolate road that he did. They were renowned for picking on him relentlessly and tossing in the occasional beating. Jacob rolled the car into a relatively level area designated for parking and shut it off. The boys, Robert and Nate, were apparently breaking whatever they could on the tractor with large sticks and rocks, while their designated leader, L.W.Suton, was apparently attempting to start fire to a large, half-dead tree at the edge of the newly made clearing. Jacob got out of the car, really pissed off and barking orders, paying no mind that he was outnumbered 3-1. Jacob approached Nate and Bob, screaming at them for the damage to his father's tractor. He approached the two, both now holding large tree branches. Before Jacob could even finish his rant, Robert took a swing at him. Jacob ducked just in time. Proud that he had just dodged the attack and feeling confident, he proceeded to... Jacob hit the ground with a thud. "Dude, what the fuck?" Nate turned to ask Leslie. Bob stood paralyzed in shock. "Didn't think I'd actually get him," Leslie replied as he nonchalantly strolled over towards the group. Leslie, while Jacob's back was turned, grabbed a large piece of fieldstone from the earth near his feet and flung it nearly 40 feet through the air, connecting with the right-hand side of Jacob's skull. Jacob lay on the grass on his stomach, blood trickling from the wound on the side of his head and from his ear. "What are we gonna do now?" asked Nate. Bob still stood frozen. "We're gonna put him in the trunk of that heap, drive it down the other side of the hill, and leave him on the side of the road next to the car. No one will be able to finger us for nothing," proclaimed Leslie, with a calmness and a confidence. "Bob, go pop the trunk." Robert stood in place. "Bob!" Leslie exclaimed. This got Bob's attention, but not much else. "Go pop that trunk," Leslie repeated. Bob listened to Leslie, offering no words in return. Leslie kicked an unconscious Jacob on his side, grabbed his hands, Nate grabbed his ankles, and the two of them lifted him up, carrying him back towards the trunk of the Ford. By the time they had got there, Bob had the trunk wide open. Despite the amount of things scattered about the trunk's interior, there was still ample room to place Jacob's body inside. Leslie slammed the trunk shut and walked off to the side to talk to his partners. "Okay, listen, if anyone asks, we were... Les?" Bob stated. His eyes grew wide, staring past Leslie and over his shoulder. "What?" Leslie shouted as he shot around. He too was shocked into speechlessness. Jacob, in his haste, forgot to place chocks behind the wheels on the car, with no brakes. When Leslie slammed the trunk shut, with the added weight in the back due to Jacob's limp body, the car began to creep backwards towards the ever-increasing slope of the mountainside. The three chased after the car in an instant, but it was no use. The car had picked up speed and was hurriedly rolling backwards down the side of the mountain, deep into an area of the woods that seemed darker than the rest. Not long before it had disappeared from sight, did they hear a loud crash. The three sprinted down the mountainside, narrowly avoiding breaking their necks on various fallen trees and large boulders. Within seconds, they had come upon the smashed Ford, trunk crumpled in against the tree that it had slammed into. The gas must have dumped, and the violent shaking of the scrap metal must have created a spark, for flames could be seen peeking from the seams of the trunk, now spread open in places due to the crumpled mess of the accident. The worst part, however, was the blood-curdling screaming and ear-piercing shrieking that came, muffled, from inside the trunk. Loud bangs coming from the inside could be heard, as if someone was desperately trying to get out. The three deviants watched in terror, frozen in place from the horror that they were witnessing, that they had caused. Jacob was alive and had woken up during the crash. He had woken up to being on fire. Bob ran to the trunk, trying to pry it open, but the crumpled metal of the car wouldn't allow it. The only thing Jacob was able to free from the trunk, through one of the wider gaps, was three peeling fingers being licked by the flames that peeked out around them. After another minute of terrible screaming and one last, high-pitched squeal, the sounds stopped. As the three ran away as fast as they could, vowing never to tell of this event, the flames in the trunk died out. Now, you would expect that someone would have found out, right? Well, the three kept true to their promise, never telling anyone what happened that day. No one with any authority that could do anything about it anyway. And besides, no mention of Jacob's death ever came to pass. Life seemed to simply just go on. Only Jacob was no longer seen in school, or anywhere for that matter. As far as everyone else was concerned, it would seem like it never happened, or that no one ever found out. About a year after everything happened, Bobby ventured through the forest to that spot in the woods. The burnt-out remains of a Ford were still there. Everything was as it should have looked, except for the trunk. The trunk was popped wide open, but when Robert nervously peered inside, he found, not including the charred remains of some scrap metal, that it was empty. Bobby never spoke of what he saw. No one ever saw Jacob's parents much again either. They would barely ever leave the house, and when they did, they would strongly avoid contact with anyone. They had turned into a couple of hermits. A few years passed, and the old couple must have passed as well, for the house grew dark and vacant, even at night. Its exterior started to become worn, the paint chipped and faded. A couple more years passed, and the roof had caved in. No one was ever seen fixing the place up. No one knew what happened to the Treagles. Some say they moved away, while others insisted they died in their sleep. Although speculations flew around about the Treagles, no one ever seemed to mention Jacob's name. The house and the land eventually reverted back into the bank's possession, and it sat vacant and ghostly for nearly a decade before a younger couple bought it. The couple was ambitious and had the financial backing to do what they wanted with the area. Natalie and Eric were their names. They made a handsome couple, each looking as if belonging to the other. After scouting the area, big plans in mind, the couple fell in love with the location. The two decided to bulldoze the now condemnable house and built a smaller one nearer the road. The area nearer the lake would be sculpted into a campground by Eric, built by him and run by his wife. With loans from the bank and a crew underway, it wasn't long before their dream came true. Their house was completed within a year, and the old house torn down, and 6 small cabins built within the following 6 months. This was excellent timing, too. The couple had just recently acquired the permits and licenses necessary from the county in order to run their intended campground. Excited, Natalie went to the local country store to pick up a couple of special things for dinner in order to celebrate. Eric informed her that he would be up at the cabins, adding the shutters to the exterior of the remaining buildings. Natalie hadn't been gone for more than 45 minutes. She pulled into her driveway after her trip to the store, bypassed the house, and proceeded up the hill to camp. The night was still and bright. Every star could be seen, and the light of the full moon almost seemed to light up the night like day. Natalie turned the corner of the trail and laid her eyes on the silent camp. She saw Eric's SUV parked at the 3rd cabin. She pulled into the campground slowly and turned in left so as to park next to Eric's vehicle. There, in the dead center of her lights, only about 10 feet away, slumped Eric against the cabin's wall, a gaping hole in his midsection. Blood, red slime-like substances, gore, bile, and all other internal biomatter was splayed out on the ground before and around him. Above him stood a dark figure. He wore a long black coat and a hood over his head. In his left hand, the thing held what looked like to be a human liver, and he was using it to create artistic designs on the cabin wall, rubbing and squeezing the large internal body part, smearing indistinguishable designs and symbols on the wall. The detail of the thing only took a heartbeat to take in, because a split second after she had stopped the car, the figure stopped his activity, turning his head extremely quickly in her direction. It was a man. He wore some kind of burnt cloth over his face. As she screamed in terror and placed the vehicle in reverse, the monstrosity sprinted towards her, jumping and landing on the hood. In the moment he was there, she was close enough to get a glimpse through the holes in the cloth covering the man's face. The only things visible beneath the fabric were easily spotted teeth and chunks of what appeared to be charred muscle. She swung the car to the right in order to back onto the trail. As she did, the man flew off the right-hand side of the car in the direction of the lake. Natalie kept the car in reverse, looking back occasionally to see the figure just standing there on the shore, watching her intently. She stopped the car with a skid. "He slaughtered my fucking husband," she thought to herself. With that, she promptly placed the car into drive, floored the gas pedal, and drove straight for the large man in black. She sped toward the man, toward the lake, but the dark figure did not move an inch. The figure slammed down onto the hood of the car, violently bouncing his head off the metal. With the same force, Natalie hit the brakes, and the grotesque man in black clothes and charred cloth flew off the hood unconscious and into the lake. Natalie drove for help as the figure sank to the bottom. Although she told the police what had happened, and although they found her husband's body, Natalie's story was never substantiated. The police drug the lake, but were unable to find any killer. The surrounding woods was searched, and the investigation went on for nearly a year, with no leads. It didn't matter, though. Natalie sold the land and moved away from Brookdale, and has never looked back. They say if you camp in the Black Woods or visit the waters of Locust Lake, that care need be taken. Take care of your campfires, avoid venturing into the Black Woods, and do not speak his name. For the murders did take place. No killer was ever caught, and the camp on the shores of Locust Lake is under new management and open once again.
Well, I hope you all got a souvenir. I know I got one. If you didn't, don't fret. There's more murderous mayhem at the lake to be had, by the truckloads. And as always, make sure to like, share, subscribe, and turn on notifications so I can catch you all again next Saturday.